have Bishop Leo O'Reilly and Mrs. Breda MacDonald of the Irish Catholic Bishops' Conference, Charles Kelly of the Order of the Knights of Columbanus, St. Columbanus, no, he's not speaking, and Sean Mullen, Evangelical Alliance Ireland. Oh, Colum as well is speaking, is that right? Yeah, I beg your pardon. So Colum Hagan, also from the Knights of Columbanus. So could I invite Bishop Leo to address us? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Convention, thank you for the invitation to be here this afternoon. I'm Bishop Leo O'Reilly, and as this is Breda MacDonald, we are representing the Council for Marriage and the Family of the Irish Bishops' Conference. And on behalf of the Council, we wish you well with your important work. Breda and I appreciate the opportunity to address the Convention on this issue, which is undoubtedly the most important of all the issues that you have been asked to consider by the government. And your response could have huge and long-term implications for our country and especially for our children. In reflecting on the importance of the decisions that you will make over the next 24 hours or so, I was reminded of a line from the final scene of Les Miserables, where the dying Valjean turns to his daughter and says, "To love another person is to see the face of God." I think there's something in that statement that resonates with every human heart. To love another person and to be loved by them is among the most precious and life-giving experiences that we can have. And that's why the Catholic Church celebrates married love with such joy and wants to protect it with such care. Something immensely precious and immensely important is at stake when we speak of married love. Married love is unique, I repeat, unique as a form of love, which has a special benefit for the whole of society. The family based on marriage is the single most important institution in any society, and to change the nature of marriage would be to undermine it as the fundamental building block of our society. As Christians, our primary commandment is to love. Love always demands that we respect the dignity of every human person, and that's why the Catholic Church insists that people who are homosexual must always be treated with sensitivity, compassion, and respect. So whatever else we agree on today, perhaps we can agree that all of us are committed to a society in which every person is treated with dignity and respect, where no person is subjected to violence or unjust discrimination, and where sincere difference of opinion is accommodated with mutual respect and a concern for the protection of the basic rights and freedoms that we enjoy. And with that, I now hand you over to Breda, who will say a little more about the nature of married love itself.
Thank you, Bishop Leo. As Bishop Leo has pointed out, we all need love and can be blessed by a wide range of relationships in our lives, in which we give and receive affection, tenderness, and love. But at the heart of our discussion today is the fact that the relationship constituted by marriage is clearly and undeniably different from all other human relationships. It is set apart specifically by our biological complementarity as male and female, something which is written into nature itself. In a way that is unique from any other human relationship, this biological complementarity, our capacity to complete each other as woman and man in marriage, opens up the possibility of having children. It is this openness to bringing new life into the world that sets marriage between a woman and a man apart from any other relationship, including same-sex relationships. For those who may wish to argue that same-sex relationships are somehow similar to those between a woman and a man in marriage, they simply cannot argue that they are equal or the same on the basis of biological fact. A same-sex couple simply cannot together be the biological parents of their own child. They cannot bring a biological child of their own into this world. This point is critical in the decision you are about to take in tomorrow's vote. Women are different from men, men are different from women. Only the union of a woman and a man can give rise to a child. This is why it is simply impossible to talk of equality between heterosexual marriage and same-sex marriage. I also hope we can agree that in this issue, the implications for children, and not what some adults want, should be the most important consideration. A very great deal of research points to the fact that, on average, the best environment for a child to be raised is by a man and a woman, and specifically by their own biological mother and father in a loving relationship, in a loving marriage. As an important piece of research from the US points out, among others, research clearly demonstrates that family structure matters for children, and the family that helps the most is a family headed by two biological parents in a low-conflict marriage. There is thus value in promoting strong, stable marriage between biological parents. That is not to say that children cannot thrive elsewhere, but it is to say that there is something special and important about having the love of your own mother and father. It would be very strange if this were not the case. Do we really want to say that mothers and fathers are no longer relevant in bringing up children? You will have heard that there is research claiming to show that having a loving mother and father has no special value at all. But it is important to take account of the fact that this research is in its very early days. The American Psychological Association research that some have cited, for example, is not based on large random samples. What we know is that when research is based on large random samples that allows us to compare one family type with another, we find that having a loving mother and father does in fact give a child the best start in life on average. It is also reasonable to suggest that the burden of proof in this issue is not on those who claim that having a loving mother and father has special value, but on those who claim it does not. That burden of proof is not yet close to being met, and we would therefore argue that to make a change to the Constitution and legal definition of marriage and the family on this basis could not be justified. If we accept that having a loving mother and father does have special value, then it makes perfect sense to encourage this and to promote it as an institution that provides a unique and essential good to society. This is what every society in history has done. This is why marriage between a man and a woman continues to deserve special recognition and protection in our Constitution. The difference between women and men belong to the very nature of marriage. A child has a right to know who she or he is. They have a right to be raised by their mother and father where possible, to have the love of his or her own mother and father. This is in the very DNA of every child. In summary, marriage between a woman and a man is best for children and for society. I'll now hand you back to Bishop Leo for some closing comments.
Clearly, there are many more things we could say, but time is limited. Your time is limited. In a very short weekend, you have been asked to decide on some very profound and fundamental questions. For example, you've been asked to decide such questions as: what is marriage? What is the best environment for bringing up children? Are the natural ties between children and their biological parents important? You've been asked to decide if the differences between women and men really matter anymore, especially in their role as mothers and fathers. You've been asked to consider if, for the first time, for the first generation in human history, the roles of mother and father are to be consigned to history and considered irrelevant in the bringing up of children. These and other complex legal and moral issues arise from these questions that you need to consider. For example, what are the implications of any decisions you take for the basic right of freedom of expression, conscience, and religion? What will the implications be for couples who want to get married in churches, mosques, and synagogues? No doubt that will happen down the road. What will be the implications for the right of ministers of different religions, of teachers, of registrars, and of others to speak and act in accordance with their conscience and with the rational, objective logic of the moral order written into the very book of nature itself? Given the importance of these issues, is it unreasonable to suggest that they deserve a lot more time and full and proper consideration and debate? I leave you with the words of the chief rabbi of France, who gives a sense of just how much is at stake here. Father and mother represent a genealogy for the child, he says. The child needs a clear and coherent genealogy to find his place as an individual. It is also most important to situate the child in a generational chain. Today, we face the immense risk of scrambling. That is what we will do if we redefine marriage. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Colum Hagan. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you won't be hearing from Charles. You're stuck with me. I represent the Order of the Knights of St. Columbanus. The Order has its roots in the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, and that extension of Christian charity to all continues to mark the work of Order members. One of the Order's best-known initiatives, in fact, is the hosting of annual Christmas Day dinners for people in need at various centres throughout the country. Our interest in this subject is explained by its great significance for families, children, and the common good of society. Now, some suggest that the change you're being invited to make is simply about extending the rights and obligations of marriage to others. But would not eliminating one of the essential characteristics of marriage, that union of one man and one woman, not radically redefine marriage and alter society's conception of that very institution? The difference of male and female is surely at the heart of marriage, and that union is the source of new life. The natural capacity of a man and a woman to have a child together is a biological capacity that cannot be replicated in a relationship involving persons of the same sex, however one values that particular union. The generation and care of children means that marriage is more than simply mutual bonds of affection, and it explains why that institution, that unique institution, has enjoyed the special esteem and protection of society in many countries throughout the world. While infertile and elderly couples can, of course, marry, that union of man and woman never denies the essential complementarity which is at the centre of marriage. Now, as you've heard, the Constitution confirms the importance of the family founded on marriage. And that partnership of a husband and wife witnesses to the right of a child to have maternal and paternal influences in its life. By abolishing marriage's grounding in the union of male and female, would not society be indicating that it sees no need for an institution exclusively committed to the ideal of offering children the experience of a mother and a father. Such a message would surely be significant, coming so shortly after a referendum in which the Irish people affirmed the best interests of a child as being of paramount consideration. Surely it is reasonable to ask whether the safeguarding of interests of children who are in non-marital situations requires or demands the deconstruction of marriage itself. Now, you've heard a lot of references to human rights, and they're of course extremely important. But people convinced of the importance of marriage might fear being labelled as opponents of fundamental rights if they resist the redefinition of marriage. So with deference to my colleague from the ICCL, let's have a look at the international human rights law on this question. And we can look at the European Convention on Human Rights. And Article 12 of that text guarantees the right of men and women to marry and to found a family. Now again, with reference to the Austrian case which you already heard about, the current case law in the Strasbourg confirms that that provision does not oblige any member state, including Ireland, to grant a same-sex couple access to marriage. States are perfectly free to reserve marriage to different sex couples without infringing anyone's human rights. That was the reasoning in that important case in 2010. And the judges, in fact, in the case went on to confirm that where a country opts to legally recognise same-sex relationships, as Ireland has done, it's not bound to confer a status equivalent to marriage. Now, these are very important pronouncements which should reassure those of you who might have concerns in that area of human rights. Treating marriage in law in a distinct way from other types of relationships is neither wrong-headed, illegitimate, or unjust discrimination. Now, as has been pointed out, many other countries recently have grappled with this question of marriage. And some states certainly have redefined it. But take a look at those that haven't. In the US, for example, over 30 states have democratically chosen to enshrine the union of a man and a woman as the definition of marriage in their constitutions. If we come closer to home in the European Union, major countries like Germany and Italy continue to define marriage in the traditional manner. Some of our newer EU member states, like Poland and Latvia, enshrine marriage as the union of a man and a woman in their constitutions. And Hungary, another EU member state which has just recently revised its constitution, has done likewise. Ireland might well be on the periphery of Europe geographically, but it's very much in the mainstream of European nations who retain that traditional definition of marriage. Not being a little bit biased, I must say, you might want to bear in mind the example of Northern Ireland. In October of last year, the Northern Ireland Assembly rejected a motion calling for the redefinition of marriage to include persons of the same sex. Now, with cross-community support required, it's likely that the definition of marriage in the North will remain in that traditional mould. By recommending redefinition, you might be opening up the prospect of a rupture in the understanding of marriage north and south of the border. And you'd be enshrining that new definition of marriage in the Constitution, a text which speaks of the Irish nation and which expressly aspires to the unity of all the people on the island. Now, commentators have drawn the distinction between civil marriage on the one hand and religious marriage. But in law, of course, there's only one definition of marriage. And that meaning, if it changed, could have potential consequences for freedom of religion and conscience of people who sincerely and without malice subscribe to that traditional understanding. If you're contemplating redefinition, you'll want reasonably to investigate how to safeguard this internationally recognised right. One only has to look to the experience of other jurisdictions to see how important changes in the law can affect the ability of religious organisations, believers, and other people of goodwill to conduct their affairs in conformity with their convictions. In England and Wales, for example, Catholic adoption agencies have had to close following the legalisation of same-sex adoption because under the law they're no longer permitted to provide those services in a way that's consistent with the Christian understanding of marriage and family. In Canada too, where marriage has changed, a Christian group was fined for having declined to host in their premises a post-ceremony celebration for a same-sex couple. You may have followed the debate on marriage in England. and the prominent lawyer there, Aidan O'Neill QC, has identified a number of potential conflicts arising from a change in marriage. For example, will teachers in schools be able to convey the traditional understanding? Will parents of children have the right to be instructed in that subject in accordance with their convictions? Will potential adopters or foster parents be excluded from consideration if they can't embrace in good conscience this new definition? Will church or religious organisations that adhere to the Christian understanding be prevented from hiring publicly funded facilities? Some or all of these considerations might apply in Ireland. Have all these potential repercussions been thought through? And if marriage is constitutionally redefined, will there be an equally robust constitutional protection for people in that position? Remember that safeguarding the rights of organisations to believe that marriage is between a man and a woman goes well beyond protecting the right of churches not to hold the wedding ceremony. These are all matters we would respectfully ask you to consider. Acknowledging the specific qualities of marriage and preserving that institution for the benefit of society is not a signal of hostility to any person. But with no established human right at issue, and in the absence of a legal obligation, surely it's appropriate to ask whether this radical transformation of marriage is necessary in order to address any of the grievances that might or could be resolved in other ways. We hope you think carefully on all those interests at stake, and we wish you well in your deliberations. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Convention, good afternoon. My name is Sean Mullen and I represent Evangelical Alliance, which is a body which seeks to provide a public presence for Christians, followers of Jesus from the Evangelical and Pentecostal traditions. I want to thank you for the privilege of addressing you at this historic time of reflection on the changes in our society, and for the privilege of being involved in the process of shaping the foundation upon which our common life will be built. In pursuit of this noble aim, Evangelical Alliance Ireland expresses its strong support in favour of the development of an inclusive civil society. An inclusive civil society which is a true republic is not one dominated by a religiously shaped cultural identity that makes second-class citizens of those who are different, whether people of other faiths or of none. But nor, on the other hand, is it a truly inclusive republic if it's dominated by a secularist ideology that makes second-class citizens of those whose views are shaped by, for example, their reliance on the teaching of Jesus. It was not the presence of Jesus' values that led to the shameful mistreatment of others in our history, but simply the absence of those values and their replacement by religious power structures that became superstructures of injustice. This has sadly been true of many societies and many different churches. These superstructures failed not only to tolerate social and ideological diversity, but often failed to follow Jesus' injunction to do good to others even when they harm us and to love even enemies. It was Jesus and not the religious leaders who turned outsiders into insiders, and he never called on the state to punish those with whom he disagreed. In respect of this failure, we believe that we must weep together that many people, not least lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people, have been treated so disrespectfully that their civil rights have been infringed in our past and that their whole identity has been reduced to one matter of disagreement, while on the other hand, we have overlooked corruptions, moral failures or sins amongst those who saw themselves as part of the moral majority. In pursuit of the aim of an inclusive civil society, and recognising that our faith calls us to stand in support and solidarity with those whose rights are being withheld or denied, EAI supported the introduction of the civil partnerships legislation in 2010, although this support was not without controversy within our own constituency. As we have worked through these issues, we've become more and more aware of gay and lesbian couples who have demonstrated commitment and lifelong fidelity in a society which resolutely chose to ignore or to oppose them. EAI proposes an inclusive, uniting, and just solution to the question before us today that protects the rights and liberties of all sections of society in this debate. Our proposal has three parts. First, the current inadequacies in civil partnership legislation need to be addressed. We recognise that the current legal and social protections for families headed by same-sex couples still fall short, and that, for example, the non-biological partner in a relationship has no legally recognised relationship with their partner's children. This is unjust, and we support a solution. Where same-sex partnerships require further legal protection, we argue that this can be achieved by significantly extending the provisions of the Civil Partnership Act of 2010. Secondly, we also support the significant section of Irish society which holds to the traditional understanding of marriage as being between one man and one woman. We wish to clarify and to state clearly our own commitment to this definition as what we believe is the best one for society as a whole, while recognising that committed, loving relationships exist in other forms. We believe that redefining marriage to include other relationships raises the possibility of weakening marriage as a social structure. We acknowledge fully that our support of the traditional understanding of marriage is based on the teaching of the Jewish and Christian scriptures. Jesus, in his teaching on marriage and divorce, makes specific reference to the male-female dimension of the relationship. However, we're not arguing that this particular view of marriage should be imposed on society simply because it's in our scriptures. We argue for it in the belief that it is best for the common good of an inclusive society that it be shaped. So we advocate both for increased civil rights for same-sex partnerships and for the retention of a traditional understanding of marriage in the Constitution. Third, and probably most importantly in the deliberations you will have over the next few hours, we want to argue for working together toward the development of an inclusive civil society. This inclusive republic, would be one dominated neither by Nietzsche nor by Newman. Such a society is by its very nature a compromise. It satisfies no one, for no one gets to have everything their way, and everyone has to listen to dissenting voices. But in such a civil society, every side gets the right to have their say, to hold to their convictions, to proclaim their beliefs and argue for their values, for the benefits of those values to wider society. Such a civil society believes, like Dr. Martin Luther King, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So it refuses the intolerant notion that someone's views have no place in the public arena just because they are shaped by a set of philosophical, religious, or irreligious convictions. A civil society strongly affirms the provision of Article 18 of the UN Charter of Human Rights, which states, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion." This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief. In such a society, due respect is given to those who hold to a traditional view of marriage. If the Constitution is altered to allow for same-sex marriage, there is a recognition of those who hold a traditional view. They are guaranteed the right to espouse that view. That does not give them the right to promote hatred toward or intolerance of LGBT people or to denigrate same-sex partnerships, but it does allow them the right to publicly declare their belief that marriage is between one man and one woman for life. In summary, then, EAI proposes an extension of the provisions of the existing civil partnerships legislation to extend and protect the rights of gay and lesbian people to have fairly recognised family structures while retaining the traditional constitutional definition of marriage. If you recommend constitutional change, we ask that a specific provision be included in that change that provides protection for organisations to espouse and teach the traditional view of marriage between a man and a woman. We've spent much of our first 90 years as a nation trying to define the shape and the shade of the white space between the orange and the green. Sadly, this white space has been stained by the stubborn refusal of each side to be porous to the story of the other, a refusal based on the conviction that if our story is right, then their story must be wrong. The colours on each side of the Republic's flag are no longer simply green and orange. Perhaps today they're yellow and pink, or they are old and new. They are religious and secular, traditional and liberal. But it is ultimately the shape and the shade of the white that matters. This weekend, this convention has a unique opportunity to model a way of shaping and shading the white in the Republic's flag. It will only do so if it shows an acceptance of one story while at the same time refusing to be porous to the other. We appeal to you for a nuanced approach to this question that models, or at least seeks to model, a new way of being together in a society that is neither sacred nor secular, but civil. Thank you very much.